Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm Mr. Drillet, and it's my pleasure to introduce this presentation on plastic in aquaculture. As you may notice, there are 4 presenters listed here, and I owe you an explanation for this. In the last couple of months, I had the chance to chair a series of roundtables in the topic of plastic in aquaculture, and we have had experts from 21 different organizations participating. I want to thank all of them. They represented a large range of stakeholders, farmers, scientists, feed and additive manufacturers, commercial laboratories, and so on. This roundtable online came in because of the urgency to deal with this topic within our field. There are gaps of knowledge. The reporting of information on this particular topic most of the time mixes aquaculture and fisheries, which may not be appropriate. And the aquaculture industry, while not necessarily being a large polluting industry in that respect, is definitely one of the industries that will be the most highly impacted by the presence, at least, of micro and nanoplastic in the water. We had initially planned to have a special session last June. We will need to wait until next June because of the actual situation, and I'm looking forward to see all of you in June in Singapore. Until then, we had decided together with IMRS, and we had agreed to organize these roundtables. There will be a report produced in the West magazine in December, also published by IMRS, so keep an eye for it. Until then, I would like to welcome 3 of our experts to introduce the main information that was discussed during the successive event. Kirsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gillette, and good morning, afternoon, and evening, colleagues. My name is Kirsten Gilardi. I'm based at the University of California, Davis in the United States, where I run the Wildlife Health Center at the School of Veterinary Medicine. I also run the California Lost Fishing Gear Recovery Project, which works with commercial fishermen to locate and remove abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear from California's coastal ocean. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this session and to share with you some of the work currently underway worldwide to better understand ocean-based sources of plastic. It's been my honor over the last 18 months to chair a new working group of the Joint Group of Experts on the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection, or GSOMP. This working group has been focused on sea-based sources of marine litter and was established at the request of the International Maritime Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the UN Environment Program. We're comprised of the 12 individuals listed at the bottom of this slide, all scientific experts in both ocean-based industries and marine debris. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge their tremendous contributions to the work undertaken over the last several months. As we speak, we're putting the finishing touches on our final technical report, which will be submitted for peer review shortly. And we anticipate the report will be released sometime in early 2021. Next slide, please. GSOMP Working Group 43's charge has been to conduct a comprehensive review of the state of knowledge around sources of marine litter from ocean uses. And by litter, we're primarily focused on plastics. Of course, our audience today is well aware of the great momentum worldwide to address the issue of ocean plastic pollution, and there's been a lot of focus on land as a source of plastic marine debris. But there's also a need to better understand how much ocean-based industries like fishing and shipping and oil and gas development and aquaculture may be contributing to the global burden. Working Group 43's charge is to establish a state of knowledge on this topic and to estimate quantities and examine impacts of ocean-based sources of marine litter on marine life and habitats. We've been particularly focused on shipping and fishing as sources. ALDFG stands for Abandoned, Lost, and Otherwise Discarded Fishing Gear. But Working Group 43 is also examining what we know about coastal and marine aquaculture as a source of marine plastic litter. Next slide, please. The aquaculture industry has been very interested and proactive to date in better understanding if and how aquaculture is contributing to the global ocean plastic burden, and the work of Working Group 43 has really benefited from these efforts. For example, the FAO conducted a large study of the use of plastics in fisheries and aquaculture in 2017 and identified aquaculture operations that depend on the use of gear comprised in part of plastic, especially expanded polystyrene floats and netting and boxes. In particular, a report produced by the Aquaculture Stewardship Council last year thoroughly reviewed the use of plastic to construct aquaculture equipment, and it really should be considered the definitive document on that subject. Another GASOMP working group 40, has been engaged for the last several years on better understanding all sources of microplastics in the ocean and has issued several reports that are available on the GASOMP website. And as well, there have been many, many excellent papers published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature examining the occurrence and quantities and impacts of plastic debris in the ocean resulting from coastal and marine aquaculture operations. The majority of that research has been taking place in the Mediterranean, South Korea, and Chile. Next slide, please. I think it's also important to make the audience aware of some important global initiatives underway that the aquaculture industry has much to offer in terms of helping those initiatives achieve goals for reduction of the global ocean plastic burden. These initiatives largely stem from the Honolulu Strategy, which arose out of the 5th International Marine Debris Conference held in 2011. The strategy serves as a framework for the reduction of the ecological, human health, and economic impacts of marine debris worldwide. UNEP has since established a global partnership on marine litter, and FAO and IMO have recently launched a joint global litter partnerships program as well. Note that marine litter will be addressed at FAO's COFI meeting in February 2021. Information about all these initiatives is readily available on the web. I'd also like to bring to your attention some important non-global initiatives. In particular, the Global Ghost Year Initiative has succeeded in bringing many nations, governments, non-governmental organizations, and industries together to collaboratively address the problem of abandoned, lost, and otherwise discarded fishing gear. I encourage you to visit their website to learn more about the Triple GI. Thank you for your attention, and now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Belinda Yashley.
Managing plastics at the farm level is thinking about macroplastics. Currently, there is an abundance of plastic that ends up in our oceans due to aquaculture. And this is because a significant portion of equipment is comprised of plastic. For example, nets, rope, and pipes are the main offenders. There's a significant portion of this equipment, as explained, and the plastic waste from aquaculture results from normal wear and tear, from accidents such as catastrophic losses to do with extreme weather events, improper management, and the key here is a strong maintenance program. So where there exist poor maintenance systems, there is often an issue with marine debris. Currently, there's no global estimates for the amount of plastic generated by the aquaculture sector, but there's some various estimated volumes from the European Economic Area. 41,000 tonnes lost annually. The Norwegian aquaculture suggests 12,300 tonnes of plastic waste was generated in 2011. And in South Korea, they're considerably more, 39,700 tonnes in 1999. But as you can see, these references are quite old, with the exception of the European Economic volumes coming from a 2016 paper. There is, however, currently and more recently one sector that's certainly making strong advances towards managing plastics on farms, which is the Tasmanian salmon industry, and I'll give some examples there of the approach. So the first step for the aquaculture facility, and this has been the approach for the Tasmanian salmon industry, is to make the commitment to manage ocean plastics. This commitment looks like, is in the form of a company policy which specifically addresses the management of plastics. So it's getting the entire business on board to commit to putting systems in place. Key here is the housekeeping, so having plans and procedures in place. A key plan is a waste management plan at the farm level. which identifies the types of materials that are used on the farm that contain plastics and how to manage them. This plan is supported by procedures, and these procedures include provisions for mitigating risk of release of these plastics and this equipment into the water. Also supporting the plan is building a plastic register to map the use and needs of types of plastics in operations. Very often there's an underestimation, and the risk register, the plastic register, helps identify this and the amount of plastic used at the farm. And developing a register has many advantages. It can help manage plastic over the lifetime of the equipment. It allows for planning for recycling and to manage mitigation measures, so the loss of gear. There's really three levels from prevention to response. Written procedures and plans when they're in place. So with those plans, the supporting systems and procedures, there can be adequate prevention and a plan to respond if required. Although the key focus here is preventing plastics from leaving the farm, so prevention really is the key. And one of the most effective ways to prevent plastic as marine debris is education. So training of staff is paramount here, so that the staff understand clearly the impacts of marine debris and where in the staff's daily activities and role they can play a part in prevention of plastics becoming lost or becoming loose. So the staff really should understand their role in marine stewardship, and this cannot be emphasised enough in the battle of ocean plastics and aquaculture. So the key areas here are a plastic register at the farm level, the register and idea of infrastructure on or in the water, waste management plans, and then looking at procedures that support that, such as strength testing as standard operating procedures for net and for rope. So making sure the gear is well maintained and there's a maintenance program in place and a risk management plan. So with all of this in place, and adequate training of staff, the Tasmanian salmon industry has been able to reduce the plastic substantially.
Thank you, Belinda, for this very nice presentation and example from Tasmania. We'll let now Natalie to talk about nanoplastic and microplastic reaching the farm.
It should be clear to you all at this point that plastics are found throughout the aquatic environment. And while a proportion certainly arise from activities in fresh and saltwater systems, including as a result of aquaculture, the evidence consistently indicates that the largest proportion of plastic debris comes from the terrestrial environment. We may think in the same terms when considering micro and nanoplastics. For example, it is believed that the majority of synthetic fibres will be released to aquatic systems via wastewater treatment, and not from the fragmentation of fishing gear, pens, and other ropes and lines. Nevertheless, proximity to certain plastic sources increases the chances of any individual, fish or invertebrate, interacting with or ingesting micro and nanoplastics of that type. In the same way that I must be aware of and exclude micro and nanoplastics from clothing and cleaning cloths in airborne lab samples due to the prevalence in the environment which I work, so too might you see a greater likelihood of micro and nanoplastics from things like pens, feed sacks, and the feed itself. Whether sourced from terrestrial systems, other aquatic industries, or your own facilities, we must be aware that micro and nanoplastics are readily taken up by a range of species. However, the amount that we see may be influenced by a number of different factors. Key amongst these are the level of environmental contamination and the characteristics of the plastic material. It's hard to consume plastics that are larger than the food that you are able to readily ingest, and it's easy to excrete plastics which are small enough to easily pass through your digestive tract. Retention of plastic by an animal is also variable, changing in relation to the length of time plastics may be held in either the gut or the tissues. This is influenced by the size of the plastic, with nanoplastics more able to cross the gut wall and into the tissues, or with the complexity of the animal's gut, with complex structures more likely to hold on to plastics. For example, the image on screen is of a bolus of plastic fibres held in the stomach of a langoustine, unable to pass through the gastric mill and on into the hindgut. As a result, the implications of both microplastic and nanoplastic exposure can vary between species. The impacts of said exposure on the animal may be negligible, as has been reported in a number of studies. But other studies have seen effects such as reduction in growth, changes in behaviour, and alteration in morphology and histology. The fact is that the current depth of research is insufficient to draw concrete conclusions which will be relevant across the industry. However, this is neither a reason to be less vigilant, nor is it sufficient to assuage the concerns of some consumers. In light of these issues, it was the conclusion of our group that the industry must take the lead in monitoring and limiting microplastics and nanoplastics in aquaculture systems. And in our report, we highlight a number of questions that may be of interest to the industry, including where might microplastic contamination come from and how microplastic uptake might be measured. And we identify widely used, simple and globally applicable protocols that are considered suitable to answer these questions. For example, the table on screen highlights measures for monitoring of plastics in an aquaculture setting. Of particular interest here are microplastics, whose monitoring requires less costly methods than those of nanoplastics and may be more accessible by most producers. It is hoped that by determining contamination levels and identifying the origins of microplastics, facilities may not only reduce their own microplastic and nanoplastic footprint, but also be able to highlight where they are unduly affected by the activities of other potential plastic sources. It has already been indicated that aquaculture is not the greatest source of plastic debris of any size, and it is important to recognise that micro and nanoplastics have been observed in a range of consumables, including kitchen salt, beer and bottled waters. However, the persistent media and public focus on marine plastic pollution has kept the discussion centred on fish and shellfish, and there may be a disproportionate effect on consumer confidence as a result, despite there being currently little to no evidence on the effects of plastic on both food safety or human health. Again, by taking ownership of the issue and by encouraging other food and drinks producers to do the same, the aquaculture industry can take control of the quality of the product, reassure customers and consumers with regard to food safety and the sustainability of the industry, and have a more impactful voice in the discussion of public policy surrounding the plastic pollution issue. For a more in-depth look at our discussion and recommendations, please do take it our report when it's published. All that remains for me to do now is to thank Guillaume for keeping us organised throughout this process, my fellow presenters and report contributors, and you, the audience, for your time. I will hand you back to Guillaume for questions. Thank you so much.